Let's go ahead and see how long it is. So yeah, it's a pretty long chapter, so we're probably going to get to maybe the whole thing, if not halfway. Let's see how far we get together. Chapter 6. Out of the frying pan, into the fire. Bilbo had escaped the goblins, but he did not know where he was. He had lost hood, cloak, food, pony, his buttons, and his friends. He wandered on till the sun began to sink westwards behind the mountains. Their shadows fell across Bilbo's path, and he looked back. Then he looked forward and could see below only ridges and slopes falling towards lowlands, and plains glimpsed occasionally between the trees. Good heavens, he explained. I seem to have gone right to the other side of the misty mountains, right to the edge of the land beyond. Where can Gandalf and the dwarves have got to? I only hope to goodness they're not still back in their power, the goblins. He still wandered on, out of Laya Valley, over its edge, and out the slopes beyond. But all the while, a very uncomfortable thought was growing inside him. He wondered where he ought not. Now he had the magic ring to go back into the horrible tunnels and look for his friends. He had just made up his mind that it was his duty, that he must turn back, and very miserable he felt about it when he heard voices. He stopped and listened. It did not sound like goblins, so he crept forward carefully. He was on a stony path winding down with a rocky wall on the left hand, and the other side of the ground sloped away, and there were dells below the level of the path overhung with bushes and low trees. In one of those dells, under the bushes, people were talking. He crept still nearer, and suddenly he saw peering between two big boulders a head with a red hood on. It was Balin, doing lookout. He could have clapped and shouted for joy, but he did not. He still had the ring, for fear of meeting something unexpected and unpleasant, and he saw that Balin was looking straight at him without noticing him. I will give them all a surprise, he thought, as he crawled into the bushes at the edge of the dell. Gandalf was arguing with the dwarves. They were discussing all that happened in the tunnels, and wondering and debating what they were to do now. The dwarves were grumbling, and Gandalf was saying that they could not possibly go on with their journey, leaving Mr. Baggins in the hands of the goblins without trying to find out if he was alive or dead, and without trying to rescue him. After all, he is my friend, said the wizard, and not a bad little chap. I feel responsible for him. I wish to goodness you had not lost him. The dwarves wanted to know why he had ever been brought at all, why he could not stick to his friends and come along with them, and why the wizard had not chosen someone with more sense. He has been more trouble than to us far, said one. If we've got one to go back now into those abominable tunnels to look for him, then drat him, I say. Gandalf answered angrily, I brought him. I don't bring things that are of no use. Either you help me to look for him, or I go and leave you out here to get out of a mess as best as you can for yourselves. If we can only find him again, you'll thank me before all is over. Whatever did you want to go and drop him off for, Dory? You would have dropped him, said Dory, if a goblin had suddenly grabbed your legs from behind in the dark and tripped up your feet and kicked you in the back. Then why don't you pick him up again? Good heavens, can you ask? Goblins fighting and biting in the dark, everybody falling over bodies and hitting one another. You nearly chopped off my head with Glamdring, and Thorin was stabbing here and there everywhere with Orchrist. All of a sudden, you gave one of your blinding flashes, and we saw goblins running back yelping. You should follow me, everybody, and everybody ought to have followed. We thought everybody had. There was no time to count, as you know quite well, till we all dashed through the gate guards, out of a lower door, and helter-skelter down there. And here we are, without the burglar. Confiscate him. And Gandalf's words, they doubted no longer. Balin was the most buzzed of all, but everyone said it was a very clever bit of work. Indeed, Bilbo was so pleased with their praise that he just chuckled inside and said nothing whatever about the ring. And they asked him how he did it. Oh, just crept along, very carefully and quietly. Well, it is the first time that even a mouse has crept along carefully and quietly under my very nose, and has not yet been spotted, said Balin, and I take off my hood to you, which he did. Balin, at your service, said he. Your servant, Mr. Baggins, said Bilbo. Then they wanted to know all about his adventures after they had lost him. He sat down and told them everything except had lost him, and he sat down, except finding the ring. They wanted to know all about his adventures. They were particularly interested in the riddle competition and shuddered most appreciatively at his description of Gollum. And then I couldn't think of any other questions with him sitting beside me, said Bilbo. So I said, what's in my pocket? And he couldn't guess in 3 guesses. So I said, what about your promise? Show me the way out. But he came out and tried to kill me, and I ran. I fell over and he missed me in the dark. Then I followed him because I heard him talking to himself. He thought I really knew the way out, so he was making for it. Then he sat down in the entrance. I could not get by, so I jumped over him, escaped, and ran down to the gate. What about the guards? They asked. Weren't they there? Oh yes, lots of them, but I dodged him. I got stuck, and the door, which was only open a crack, and then lost lots of buttons, he said sadly, looking at his torn clothes, but I squeezed through all right, and here I am. The dwarves looked at him with quite new respect, where he talked about dodging guards, jumping over Gollum, and squeezing through as if it was nothing difficult or alarming. What did I tell you? Said Gandalf, laughing. Mr. Baggins has more about him than you guessed. He gave Bilbo a queer look from his bushy eyebrows, he said, and the Hobbit wondered if he guessed that part of his tale, or that he left that out. Then he had questions of his own to ask, for if Gandalf had explained all by now to the dwarves, Bilbo had not heard of it. He wanted to know how the wizard had turned up again, and where they all had to go now. The wizard, to tell the truth, never minded explaining his cleverness more than once. So now he told Bilbo that both he and Elrond had been there, well aware of the presence of evil goblins in that part of the mountains. But their main gate used to come out on different paths, one more easy to travel by, so they often caught people benighted near the gates. Evidently, people had gotten up going that way, and the goblins must have opened their new entrance at the top of the pass. The dwarves have taken quietly recently, because it had found quite safe up to now. I must see if I can find a more or less decent giant to block it up again, said Gandalf, or soon there will be no getting over the mountains at all. As soon as Gandalf heard, Bilbo yelled. He realized what had happened. In the flash which killed the goblins that were grabbing him, he had nibbled inside the crack, just as it snapped to. He followed after the drivers and prisoners right to the edge of the great hall, and there he sat and worked up the best magic he could in the shadows. A very ticklish business it was, he said, touch and go. But of course, Gandalf had made a special study of bewitchments with fire and lights. Or even the Hobbit had never forgotten the magic fireworks at Old Tuck's Midsummer's Eve party, as you remember. The rest we all know, except that Gandalf knew all about the back door, as the goblins called the lower gate, where Bilbo lost his buttons. As a matter of fact, it was well known to anybody who was acquainted with this part of the mountains, but it took a wizard to keep his head in the tunnels and guide in the right direction. They made that gate ages ago, he said, partly for a way of escape if they needed one, partly as a way out into the lands before they still come in the dark and do great damage. They guard it always, and no one has ever managed to block it up. They will guard it doubtly. After this, he laughed, and the others laughed too. After all, they had lost a great deal, but they killed the great goblin and the great many others besides, and they all had escaped, so they might be said to say, had the best of it so far. But the wizard called them to their senses. We must be getting on at once. Now, we're a little rested, he said. They'll be out after us in hundreds when night comes on, and already shadows are lengthening. They can smell our footsteps for hours and hours after we've passed them. We must be miles on before dusk. There will be a bit of moon if it keeps fine, and that is lucky. Not that they mind the moon much, but it will give us a light to steer by. Oh yes, he said in answer to more questions from the Hobbit. You lose track of time inside Goblet's tunnels. Today's Thursday, and it was Monday night or Tuesday morning that when we were captured. We've gone miles and miles, come right down to the heart of the mountain, and now we're on the other side. Quite a shortcut, but we're too far north and some awkward country ahead, and we're still pretty high up, so let's get on. I'm dreadfully hungry, growled Bilbo, who was suddenly aware that he had not only one meal since the night before, and the night before the last. Just think of that for a hobbit. His stomach felt all empty and loose, and his legs wobbly, now that the excitement was over. Can't help it, said Gandalf, unless you like to go back and ask the goblins nicely to have your pony back and your luggage. No, thank you, said Bilbo. Very well then, we must just tighten our belts and trudge on, or we shall be made into supper, and that will be much worse than having none ourselves. As they went on, Bilbo looked from side to side for something to eat, but the blackberries were still only in flower, and of course there were no nuts, not even hawthorn berries. He nibbled a bit of sorrel, and he drank from a small mountain stream that crossed the path, and he ate 3 wild strawberries that he found on its bank, but it was not much good. They still went on and on. The rough path disappeared. The bushes and the long grasses between the boulders, the patches of the rabbit-cropped turf, the thyme and the sage, and the marjoram, and the yellow rock roses all vanished, and they found themselves at the top of a wide, steep slope of falling stones, the remains of a landslide. When they began to go down this, rubbish and small pebbles rolled away from their feet. Soon larger bits of split stone went clattering down and started other pieces below, slithering and rolling. Then lumps of rocks were disturbed and bounced off, crashing down with a dust and a noise. Before the long, whole slope above and below them seemed on the move, and they were sliding away, huddled all together in a fearful confusion of slipping, rattling, cracking slabs and stones. It was the trees at the bottom that saved them. They slid into the edge of a climbing wood of pines. There stood up the mountain slope from the deeper, darker forest of the valleys below. Some caught hold of the trunks and swung themselves into lower branches. Some, like the little hobbit, got behind a tree to shelter from the onslaught of the rocks. Soon the danger was over. The slide had stopped, and the last faint crashes could be heard as the largest of the disturbed stones went pounding and spinning among the bracken and the pine roots far below. Well, that has got us on a bit, said Gandalf, and even goblins tracking us will have a job to come down here quietly. I dare say, grumbled Bumbar, but they don't find it difficult to send stones bouncing down on their heads. The dwarves and Bilbo were feeling far from happy, and were rubbing their bruised and damaged legs and feet. Nonsense, we're going to turn aside here out of the path of the slide. We must be quick. Look at the light. The sun had gone behind the mountains. Already the shadows were deepening about them, far, far through the trees, and over the back of the tops of the growing lower down they could still see the evening lights in the plains beyond. They limped along now, as fast as they were able to, gentle slopes of a pine forest and a slanting path leading steadily southwards. At times they were pushing through a sea of bracken with frogs rising right above the hobbits' heads, or at times they were marching along quiet over a floor of pine needles, and while the forest gleam got heavier and the forest silence deeper, there was no wind that evening to bring even a sea sighing into the branches of the night. Must be gone any further, said Bilbo. When it was so dark you could only just see Thorin's so quiet he could hear the dwarves breathing like a loud noise. My toes are all bruised and bent, my legs ache, and my stomach is wagging like an empty snack. A bit further, said Gandalf. After what seemed ages further, they came suddenly to an opening where no trees grew. The moon was up and was shining into the clearing. Somehow it struck all of them as not at all a nice place, although there was nothing wrong to see. All of a sudden they heard a howl away down a hill, a long shuddering howl. It was answered by another way to the right and a good deal near to them, then another not far to the left. It was wolves howling at the moon, wolves gathering together. There were no wolves living near Mr. Baggins's home at home, but he knew that noise. He had it described to him even enough in tales. One of his elder cousins, on the Took side, who had been a great traveler, used to imitate it to frighten him. To hear it out in the forest under the moon was too much for a Bilbo. Even magic rings are not much use against wolves, especially against the evil packs that lived under the shadow of the goblin-infested mountains, over the edge of the wild, on the borders of the unknown. Wolves of that sort smell keener than goblins, and do not need to see you to catch you. What shall we do? What shall we do? He cried. Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves, he said, and it became a proverb, though we now say out of the frying pan into the fire, in the same sort of uncomfortable situations. Up the trees, quick, said Gandalf, and they ran up to the trees at the edge of the glade, hunting for those that had branches fairly low, or were slender enough to swarm up. They found them as quick as they ever could. You can guess. Up they went as high as ever they could trust the branches. You would have laughed from a safe distance if you had seen the dwarfs sitting up in the trees with their beans dangling down like old gentlemen gone correct and playing at being boys. Billy and Gilly were at the top of a tall larch, like an enormous Christmas tree. Dory, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Gloin were more comfortable in a huge pine tree with regular branches, sticking out at intervals like the spokes of a wheel. Biffer, Boffer, and Bomber and Thorin were in another. Thorin and Balin had swarmed up a tall, slender fir, few with branches, and were trying to find a place to sit in the greenery on the topmost boughs. Gandalf, who was a great deal taller than the others, had found a tree into which they could not climb, a large pine standing at the edge of the glade. He was quite hidden in its boughs, but you could see his eyes gleaming in the moon as he peeped out. And Bilbo, he could not get into any tree. He was scuttling around trunk to trunk like a rabbit that had lost his hole and a dog after it. You've left the burglar behind, said Nori and Dory, looking down. I can't be carrying burglars on my back, said Dory, down tunnels and up trees. What do you think I am, a porter? He'll be eaten if we don't do something, said Thorin, for there were howls all around them now, getting nearer and nearer. Dory, he called for Dory, who was lowest down in the easiest street. Be quick and give Mr. Baggins a hand up. Dory was really a decent fellow in spite of his grumbling. Poor Bilbo could not reach his hand, even when he climbed down to the bottom branch and hung his arm down as far as he ever could. So Dory actually climbed out of the tree and let Bilbo scramble up and stand on his back. Just at that moment, the wolves trotted howling into the clearing. All of a sudden, there were hundreds of eyes looking at them. Still, Dory did not let Bilbo down. He waited till he had clambered off his shoulders into the branches, and then he jumped off the branches himself, only just in time. A wolf snapped at his cloak as he swung up. In a minute, there was a whole pack of them yelping all around at the tree and keeping up on the trunk, with eyes blazing and tongues hanging out. But even wild wargs, for so the evil words over the edge of the wild were named, could not climb trees. For a time they were understand it. The wargs and the goblins often help one another in wicked deeds. Goblins do not usually venture very far from their mountains unless they're driven out and looking for new homes or marching to war, which I am glad to say has not happened for a long while. But in those days, they sometimes used to go on the raids, especially to get food or slaves to work for them. Then they would often get the wargs to help and shared the plunder with them. Sometimes they rode on wolves like men do on horses. Now it seemed like a great goblin raid had been planned for that very night. The wargs had come to meet the goblins, and the goblins were late. The reason, no doubt, was the death of the great goblin, and all the excitement caused by the dwarves and Bilbo and the wizard for whom they were probably still hunting. In spite of the dangers of this far land, bold men had of late been making their way back into the south, cutting down trees and building themselves places to live in among the more pleasant woods in the valleys and along the river shores. There were many of them, and they were brave and well armed, and even the wargs dared not attack them if they were together or in the bright day. But now they had planned, with the goblins' help, to come by night upon some of the villages nearest the mountains. If their plan had been carried out, there would have been none left there next day. All would have been killed except the few goblins kept from the wolves and carried back as prisoners to their caves. There was dreadful talk to listen to, not only because of the brave women and their wives and children, but also because of the danger which now threatened Gandalf and his friends. The wargs were angry and puzzled at finding them here in their very meeting place. They thought they were friends of the woodmen, and they were to come spy on them, and would take the news off their planes down into the valleys, and the goblins and the wolves would have to fight a terrible battle instead of capturing prisoners and devouring people waked suddenly from their sleep. So the wargs had no intention of going away and letting the people up the trees escape at any rate, not until morning. And long before that, they said, goblin soldiers would be coming down the mountains, and goblins could climb trees or cut them down. Now you can understand why Gandalf, listening to their growling and yelping, began to be dreadfully afraid, wizard though he was, and to feel they were in a very bad place, and had not yet escaped at all. All the same, he was not going to let them have it their own way, though he could not do much, stuck up in a tall tree with wolves all around on the ground below. He gathered the huge pine cones from the branches of the tree. Then he set one alight with bright blue fire, and threw it whizzing down the circle of the wolves. It struck one on the back, and immediately his shaggy coat caught fire, and he was leaping to and fro, yelping horribly. Then another came on the ground in the middle of the circle and went off in the colored smoke, especially large when it hit the chief wolf on the nose, and he leaped in the air 10 feet, then rushed around and around the circle, biting and snapping even at the other wolves in his anger and fright. The dwarves and Bilbo shouted and cheered. The rage of the wolves was terrible to see, and the commotion that made filled all the forest. Wolves was afraid of fire at all times, but it was a most horrible and uncanny fire. If a spark got in their coats, it stuck and burned into them, and unless they rolled over quick, they were soon all in flames. Very soon, all about the glade wolves were rolling over and over to put out the sparks on their backs, while those were burning were running around howling and settling others at light, till their own friends chased them away, and they fled off down the slopes crying and yammering and looking for water. "What's all this uproar in the forest tonight?" said the Lord of the Eagles. He was sitting black in the moonlight on the top of a lonely pinnacle of a rock at the eastern edge of the mountains. "I hear wolves' voices. Are the goblins at mischief in the woods?" He swept up in the air, and immediately 2 of his guards from the rocks at either hand leaped up to follow him. They circled up in the sky and looked down the ring of the wargs. A tiny eagles have keen eyes and can see small things at a great distance. The Lord of the Eagles of the Misty Mountains had eyes. It could look at the sun unblinking. It could see a rabbit moving on the ground a mile below, even in the moonlight. So though he could not see the people in the trees, he could make out the commotion among the wolves and see the tiny flashes of fire and hear the howling and the yelping come from faint far beneath him. Also, he could see the giant of the moon of goblin spears and hamlets, as long lines of the wicked folk crept down the hillsides from their gate and wound into the wood. Eagles are not kindly birds. Some are cowardly and cruel, but the ancient race of the northern mountains were the greatest of all birds. They were proud and strong and noble-hearted. They did not love goblins or fear them when they took any notice of them at all. They swooped on them and drove them shrieking back to their caves and stopped whatever wickedness they were doing. The goblins hated the eagles and feared them, but could not reach their lofty seats or drive them from the mountains. Tonight, the Lord of the Eagles was filled with curiosity to know what was afoot, so he summoned other eagles to him, and they flew from the mountains, and slowly circling ever round and round, they came down, 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 toward the ring of the wolves and the meeting place of the goblins. A very good thing, too. Dreadful things had going down there. The wolves that had caught fire and fled into the forest had set alight in several places. It was high summer, and on the eastern side of the mountain there has been a little rain for some time. Yellowing bracken, falling branches, deep-piled pine needles, and here and there dead trees were soon in flames. All round the clearing of the wargs, fire was leaping, but the wolf guards did not leave the trees. Maddened and angry, they were leaping and howling round the trunks and cursing the dwarves in their horrible language, with their tongues hanging out and their eyes shining as red and fierce as flames. Suddenly, goblins came running and yelling. They thought a battle with the woman was going on, but they soon learned what had happened. Soon, they actually sat down and laughed. Others waved their spears and clashed the shafts against their shields. Goblins are not afraid of fire, and they soon had a plan which seemed to them most amusing. Some got all the wolves together in a pack. Some stacked fern and brushwood round the tree trunks. Others rushed around and stamped and beat and stamped until nearly all the flames were put out, but they did not put out the fire nearest to the trees where the dwarves were in, that fire that fed with leaves and dead branches and bracken. Soon they had a ring of smoke and flame all around the dwarves, a ring which they kept from spreading outwards, but it closed slowly in till the running fire was licking the fuel piled under the trees. Smoke was in Bilbo's eyes. He could feel the heat of the flames, and through the wreck he could see the goblins dancing round and round in a circle like people round a midsummer bonfire. Outside the ring, dancing warriors with spears and axes stood the wolves. At respectful distance, watching and waiting, he could hear the goblins beginning a horrible song. 15 birds in fire trees. These feathers fanned a fiery breeze. But funny little birds, they had no wings. Oh, what shall we do with the funny little things? Roast them alive or stew them in a pot. Fry them, boil them, and eat them hot. Then they stopped and shouted out, "Fly away, little birds. Fly if you can. Come down, little birds, or you'll get roasted in your nest. Sing, little birds, why don't you sing?" "Go away, little birds," shouted Gandalf in answer. "It isn't bird nesting time. Also, naughty little boys that play with fire get punished." He said it to make them angry and to show he was not afraid. Though, of course, he was. Wizards though he was. But they took no notice, and they went on singing. "Burn, burn, tree and fern, shivel and scorch a fizzling torch to light the night for your delight, yo-ho. Bake and toast him, fry and roast him, all beards, seized him in the talons, and was gone. There was a howl of anger and surprise from the goblins. Loud cried the Lord of the Eagles, to whom Gandalf had now spoken. Back swept the great birds that were with him, and down they came like huge black shadows. The wolves yammered and gnashed their teeth. The goblins yelled and snapped with rage, and flung their heavy spears in the air in vain. Over them swooped the eagles. The dark rush of their beating wings smote them to the floor or drove them far away. Their talons tore a goblin's face. Other birds flew up to the treetops and seized the dwarves, who were scrambling up now as fast as they could. Poor little Bilbo was nearly left behind. He just managed to catch hold of Dory's legs as Dory was borne off first, and up all they went together, above the tumult and the burning, Bilbo swinging in the air with his arms nearly breaking. Now far below, the goblins and the wolves were scattering far and wide in the woods. A few eagles were circling and sweeping above the battleground. The flames about the trees sprang suddenly up above the highest branches. They went up in crackling fire. There was a sudden flurry of sparks and smoke. Bilbo had escaped only just in time. Soon, the light of the burning was faint below, a red twinkle on the black floor, and they were high up in the sky, rising all the time strong sweeping circles. Bilbo never forgot that fight, clinging onto Dory's ankles. He moaned, my arms, but Dory groaned, my legs, my legs. At the best of times, heights made Bilbo giddy. He used to turn queer if he looked over the edge of quite a little cliff, and they never liked the ladders, let alone trees, so you can imagine how his head swam now when he looked down between his dangling toes and saw the dark lands opening wide underneath him, touched here and there with the light of the moon on a hillside rock or a stream in the plains. The pale peaks of the mountains were coming nearer, moonlit spikes of rock sticking out of a black shadow. Somewhere or not, it seemed very cold. He shut his eyes and wondered if he could hold on any longer. Then he imagined what would happen if he did not. He felt sick. The flight ended only just in time for him, just before his arms gave away. He loosened Dory's ankles with a gasp and fell onto the rough platform on an eagle's eyrie. There they lay without speaking, and his thoughts were a mixture of surprise at being saved from the fire, and in fear lest he fell off that narrow place into the deep shadows on either side. He was feeling very queer indeed in his head, and by this time, after the dreadful adventures of this last 3 days with the next to nothing to eat, and he found himself saying aloud, now I know what a piece of bacon feels like when it's suddenly picked out of the pan on a fork and put back on the shelf. No, you don't, said Dory, answering, because the bacon knows that it'll get back in the pan sooner or later, and it's going to be hoped we shan't. Also, eagles aren't forks. Oh no, not a bit of storks. Forks, I mean, Bilbo sitting up like looking anxiously at the eagles who perched close by. He wondered what other nonsense he had been saying, and if the eagle would think it's rude. You ought not to be rude to an eagle when you're only the size of a hobbit, and you're up eerie at night. The eagle only sharpened his beak on a stone and trimmed his feathers, and took no notice. The eagle came back, seized him in the talons, and the eagle sharpened his beak on a stone and trimmed his feathers, and took no. Soon after Eagle flew up, the Lord of the Eagles bids you to bring your prisoners to the great shelf. He was no path down to save it by flying, and no path down off except by jumping over a precipice. There he found all the others sitting with their backs to the mountain wall. The Lord of the Eagles also was there and was speaking to Gandalf. It seemed that Bilbo was not going to be eaten after all. The wizard and the Eagle Lord appeared to know one another slightly, and even to be on friendly terms. As a matter of fact, Gandalf, who had often been in the mountains, had once rendered a service to the Eagles and healed their lord from an arrow wound. So you see, prisoners had meant prisoners rescued from the goblins only, and not captives of the Eagles. Also, Bilbo listened to the talk of Gandalf. He realized at last that they were going to escape really and truly from the dreadful mountains. He was discussing plans with the great eagle for carrying the dwarves and himself and Bilbo far away and setting them down. Well, on their journey across the plains now. The Lord of the Eagles would not take them anywhere near where men lived. They would shoot at us with their great bows, for they would think we were after their sheep, and at the other, they would be right. No, we're glad to cheat the goblins of their sport, and glad to repay our thank you to you, but we will not risk ourselves for dwarves in the Southland plains. Very well, said Gandalf. Take us where and as far as you will. We're already deeply obliged to you, but in the meantime, we are famished with hunger. I'm nearly dead of it, said Bilbo, in a weak little voice that nobody heard. That can perhaps be mended, said the Lord of Eagles. Later on you might have seen a bright fire on the shelf on rock, the figures of the dwarf round it cooking and making a fine roasting smell. The Eagles had brought up dry boughs of fuel, and they had brought rabbits, hares, and a small sheep. The dwarfs managed all the preparations. Bilbo was too weak to help, and anyway, he was not much good at skinning rabbits or cutting up meat, being used to having it delivered by the butcher all ready to cook. Gandalf, too, was lying down after doing his part in setting the fire going, since Oin and Gloin had lost their tinder boxes. So ended the adventures of the Misty Mountains. Soon, Bilbo's stomach was feeling full and comfortable again, and he felt he could sleep contentedly, though, really, he would have liked a loaf of butter better than meat toasted on sticks. He slept curled up on a hard rock more soundly than ever had done on his feather bed in his own little hole at home. But all night he dreamt of his own house, and wandered to his sleep into his different rooms, looking for something that he could not find nor remember what it looked like. Thank you, everyone. That was chapter 6 of The Hobbit. I hope you've enjoyed this soft, cozy reading, and I'll see you next time for chapter 7.